Hello, my name is Trayvon Gross, and tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I want to discuss two of the most devastating drug epidemics in the U.S. history: the crack epidemic of the 1980s and the opioid epidemic of the past 2 decades. While both crises involved dangerous drugs and ravaged communities, the government the government's responses to these biases embedded in our society and understanding this disparity is essential to fostering a more equitable future. The crack epidemic disproportionately affected Black and Latino communities, particularly in urban areas. In response, the U.S. government launched an aggressive war on drugs characterized by harsh sentencing laws and heavy policing. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 introduced 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. Despite the chemical similarities between the two, this disparity targeted poor minority communities, leading to mass incarceration and long-term social consequences. Instead of receiving treatment for addiction, people struggling with crack dependency were labeled a criminal and the focus on the punishment rather than rehabilitation. By 1997, the number of individuals in prison for non-violent drug offenses has surged to 400,000. Just 50,000 in 19 from just 50,000 in 1980. This approach disproportionately criminalized Black Americans while ignoring the socio-economic issue that underpinned the drug issue. In contrast, the opioid epidemic has largely impacted white, suburban, and rural communities. Instead of a war on drugs, the response has emphasized public health measures focusing on addiction treatment, harm reduction, and compassion. Federal funds have been directed towards treatment programs, mental health services, and access to overdose recovering drugs like naloxone. Laws like the Support Act of 2018 focus on expanding access to treatment for opioid addiction, reducing overprescription, and supporting recovery efforts. Rather than being criminalized, opioid users have been seen as victims as public health crises deserving of medical care and rehabilitation. Why did these two crises, both causing immense harm, receive such different responses? One key reason is racial demographics. Crack affected predominantly Black and Latino communities, which were historically more vulnerable to punitive law enforcement. Meanwhile, the opioid epidemic victims are mostly white and middle class, prompting a more compassionate response. Media coverage also played a significant role during the crack epidemic. The media depicted users as criminals contributing to violence in their communities. In contrast, coverage of the opioid crisis has often focused on the personal stories of addiction, portraying users as victims in need of help. In conclusion, the U.S. response to the crack epidemic was rooted in punishment, while the opioid crisis has been addressed with compassion and public measures. These disparities reveal how race and class shape our approach to drug addiction. To move forward, we must confront these biases and work toward policies that treat all communities with with fairness and empathy, recognizing addiction as a public health issue, not a crime. My name is Trayvon Gross, and thank you for your time.